Hi there. It's day 252 of our Through the Bible in 1 Year. 2 more chapters in Ezekiel today, 40 and 41. Well, hope your day's going well. Okay, now we're talking about the future, okay? But this may or may not have happened yet. We're not doing a deep dive study. We're just reading through the entire Bible in a year. So when we do deep dive studies on these, they'll be familiar to us, right? Okay, chapter 40. In the 25th year of our exile, at the beginning of the year, on the 10th day of the month, in the 14th year of Jerusalem had been captured, on that very day the Lord's hand was on me. He brought me there. And he brought me there. In visions of God, he took me to the land of Israel and set me down on a very high mountain. On its southern slope was a structure resembling a city. He brought me there, and I saw a man whose appearance was like bronze, with a linen cord and a measuring rod in his hand. He was standing by the gate. He spoke to me, Son of man, look with your eyes, listen with your ears, and pay attention to everything I'm going to show you, for you have been brought here so that I might show it to you. Report everything you see to the house of Israel. Right. The walls and outer gates. Now there was a wall surrounding the outside of the temple. The measuring rod in the man's hand was 6 units of 21 inches each. It was a standard length plus 3 inches. He measured the thickness of the wall structure. It was about 10 feet, and its height was the same. Then he came to the gate that faced east and climbed its steps. He measured the threshold of the gate. It was 10 feet deep, and the first threshold was 10 feet deep. Each recess was about 10 feet long and 10 feet deep, and there was a space of 8 3/4 feet between the recesses. The inner threshold on the gate, on the temple side next to the gate's portico, was about 10 feet. Next, he measured the portico of the gate. It was 14 feet, and its pilasters were 3.5 feet. The portico of the gate was on the temple side. There were 3 recesses on each side of the east gate, each with the same measurements, and the pilasters on the other side also had the same measurements. And he measured the width of the gate's entrance. It was 17.5 feet, while the width of the gateway was 22 3/4 feet. There was a barrier of 21 inches in front of the recesses on both sides, and the recesses on each side were 10.5 feet square. Are you getting all this? Then he measured the gateway from the roof of one recess to the roof of the opposite one. The distance was 43 3/4 feet. The openings of the recesses faced each other. Next, he measured the pilaster, 105 feet. The gate extended around to the pilaster of the court. The distance from the front gate at the entrance to the front gate's portico on the inside was 87.5 feet. The recesses in their pilasters had beveled windows all around the inside of the gateway. The porticos also had windows all around on one side. Each pilaster was decorated with palm trees. Then he brought me into the outer court. And there were chambers and a paved surface laid about all. Then he brought me into the outer court, and there were chambers and a paved surface laid out all around the court. 30 chambers faced the pavement, 30, which flanked the gates and corresponded to the length of the gates. This was the lower pavement. Then he measured the distance from the front of the lower gate to the exterior front of the inner court. It was 175 feet. This was east next the north is described. Man, this is confusing to me. I'm not one of these statistical kind of guys, okay? He measured the gate of the outer court facing the north wall, but both its length and width. Its 3 recesses each side and pilasters and its portico had the same measurements as the first gate, 87.5 feet long, 43 1/4 feet wide. Its windows, portico, palm trees, and the same measurements as those the gate that faced east. 7 steps led up the gate, and its portico was ahead of them. The inner court had a gate facing the north gate, like the one on the east. He measured the distance from gate to gate. It was 175 feet. He brought me to the south side. There was also a gate on the south. He measured his pilasters and portico. They had the same measurements as the others. Both the gate and the portico had all windows around, all like the other windows. 87.5 feet long, 43 1/4 feet wide. The stairway had 7 steps. The portico was ahead of them. It had palm trees on its pilasters on each side. The inner court had a gate on the south. He measured from the gate to the south 175 feet. So all sides are the same. He could have described it once and said all sides are the same. Okay, the inner gates. The Then he brought me to the inner court through the south gate. When he measured the south gate, it had the same measurements as the others. Its recesses, pilaster, portico, the same measurements, 87.5 feet long, 43.25 feet wide. Porticos all around, 43.25 feet wide. Its portico faced the outer court, and its pilasters were decorated with palm trees. The stairway had 8 steps. And he brought me to the inner court on the east side. When he measured the gate, it had the same measurements as the others. It was recessed and pilasters, portico, the same measurements as the others. Both the its portico had windows all around, 87.5 feet, 43.75 feet wide. Portico faced the outer court, pilasters decorated with palm trees on each side, and the stairway had 8 steps. Is he going to do this for each side? I guess he is. And he brought me to the north gate, and he measured the north gate, the same measurements as the others. As did its recessed, pilasters, portico. Okay, everything's the same. Okay, windows all around, 87.5, 43.25, portico, outer court, pilasters decorated with palm trees on each side. The stairway had 8 steps. Rooms for preparing sacrifices. The chamber whose door opened to the portico of the gate, the burnt offering was to be washed there. Inside the portico of the gate, there were 2 tables on each side, one which to slaughter the burnt offering, sin offering, and restitution offering. Another outside, as one approaches the entrance to the north gate, there were 2 tables on one side and 2 more tables on the other side of the gate's portico. So there were 4 tables inside the gate and 4 outside, 8 tables, all on which the slaughtering was to be done. I don't know why that bothers me, but there were also 4 tables of cut stone for the burnt offering, each 31.5 inches long, 31.5 inches wide, and 21 inches high. The utensils used to slaughter the burnt offerings and other sacrifices were placed on them. They were 3-inch hooks fastened all around with the side of the room, and the flesh of the offering was to be laid on the tables. Rooms for singers and priests. Outside the inner gate, within the inner court, there were chambers for the singers, one beside the north gate facing south, the other beside the south gate facing north. Then the man said to me, the chamber that faces south is for the priests who keep charge of the temple. The chamber that faces north is for the priests keeping charge of the altar. These are the sons of Zadok, the ones from whom sons of Levi may approach the Lord to serve him. Next he measured the court. It was square, 175 feet long, 175 feet wide. The altar was in front of the temple. Then he brought me to the portico of the temple and measured the pilasters of the portico. They were 8.75 feet thick on each side. The width of the gateway was 24.5 feet, and the side walls of the gate were 5.25 feet on each side. The portico was 35 feet across, 21 feet deep, and 10 steps led up to it. There were pillars by the pilasters, each one on each side. Next he brought me into the great hall and measured the pilasters on each side. The width of the pilaster was 10.5 feet. The width of the entrance was 17.5 feet. And the walls of the entrance were 8.75 feet wide on each side. He also measured the length of the great hall, 170 feet wide, 70 feet, and the width 35 feet. He went inside the next room and measured the pilasters of the entrance to 3.5 feet wide. The entrance was 10.5 feet wide, and the width of the entrance side wall was 12.25 feet. He then measured the length of the room and adjacent to the hall, 35 feet, and the width 35 feet, and he said to me, "This is the most holy place." Outside the temple. Then he measured the wall of the temple. It was 10.5 feet thick. The width of the side rooms all around the temple was 7 feet. The side rooms were arranged one above another in 3 stories, 30 rooms each. Yeah. There were ledges on the wall of the temple all around to serve as supports for the side rooms so that the supports would not be in the temple itself. The side rooms surrounding the temple widened at each successive story, for the structure surrounding the temple went up by stages. This was the reason for the temple's broadness as it rose. And so one could go up from the lowest story to the highest by means of the middle one. I saw that the temple had a raised platform surrounding it. Its foundation from the side rooms was 10.5 feet. The thickness of the outer wall of the side rooms was 8.75 feet. The free space between the side rooms of the temple and the other chambers was 35 feet wide all around the temple. The side rooms opened into the free space, one entrance toward the north, another towards the south. The area of free space was 8.75 feet wide all around. Like a hallway, right? Now the building to face the temple yard to the west is 202.5 feet wide, The wall of the building was 8 3/4 feet thick on all sides, and the building's length was 157.5 feet. Then the man measured the temple. It was 175 feet long. In addition, the temple yard and the building, including its walls, were 175 feet long. The width in the front of the temple along the temple yard east was 175. Measured the length of the building from the temple yard to the west, its galleries, each side was 175 feet on all sides. Interior wooden structures. The interior of the great hall and all the porticos of the court, thresholds, the beveled windows, the balconies, and all around, with their 3 levels opposite the threshold, were overlaid with wood on all sides. There they paneled from the ground to the windows, but the windows were covered. Reaching to the top of the entrance as far as the inner temple on the outside, every wall all around and on the inside and the outside was a pattern carved with cherubim and palm trees. There was a palm tree between each pair of cherubim. Each cherub had 2 faces, a human face turned toward the palm tree on one side, and a lion's face turned toward it on the other. They were carved throughout the temple on all sides. Cherubim and palm trees were carved from the ground to the top of the entrance and on the wall of the great hall. The doorposts of the great hall were square, and the front of the sanctuary had the same appearance. The altar was made of wood, 5 1/4 feet high, 3 1/2 feet long. It had corners at its length. The sides were of wood. The man told me, "This is the table that stands before the Lord." The great hall and the sanctuary each had a double door. Each of the doors had 2 swinging panels. There were 2 panels for one door and 2 for another. Cherubim and palm trees were carved on the doors of the great hall like those carved on the walls. There was a wooden canopy outside in front of the portico. There were beveled windows and palm trees on both sides. On the side walls of the portico, the side rooms of the temple, and of the canopies. Wow. Did you get all that? Okay, I didn't. Okay. I got lost in it almost right away. Because that kind of stuff just goes right over my head. Okay. And it continues tomorrow in the priest chambers, outside dimensions, return of the Lord's glory, the altar. Well, they're just going to keep describing the new temple. Now, this one that was built in Jerusalem, is it a new one? Is it an old one? We don't know. Prince of privilege, the Levites' duties and privileges, the priest's duties and privileges, the sacred portion of the land, the people's contribution to the sacrifices. Yeah, it just keeps talking about the new temple all the way to the end. Right? There's the last day. Sacrifices at appointed times. Transfer of royal lands, the temple kitchens, the life-giving river, border of the land, the tribal allotments. There you go. And all the measurements and measurements and measurements. So there you have it. The rest of the chapter is on the temple, the rites of the temple, the size of the temple, what the temple looks like, where the people work, what they're going to do there. All right? And who gets what. So, like I said, I don't think the temple's been built yet. I don't know. It might have been built and torn down again. Who knows? But we'll find out, right? Eventually we'll find out. So, there you have it. That's day 252. Catch up on anything you may have missed. You want to say you got the whole Bible in a year. They're all down there. And give us a like if you think about it. But till tomorrow, we'll keep going. See ya.